Oh, good evening, everybody. The thought seeds of what I wanted to talk about arose out of Dyson that I had with somebody. This week, I don't even remember who it was. Might be somebody that was here, might not. But it was about the fact that initially it was believed or presumed that Buddhist teachers were infallible. When I say initially, I mean in terms of the early years of Zen Buddhist practice and other Buddhist practices here in the West, in North America. And the earliest teachers to come here were often regarded as having that kind of infallibility. Fortunately, by now there's enough teachers like me that completely disprove that possibility. And that's a good thing to a certain extent. So I want to talk a little about teachers authority, about the process of Zen. You know, where do teachers derive our authority? Well, in one sense, we derive it out of lineage. Okay, and that's the big thing, right? We receive Dharma transmission, and through that act are empowered to teach. And the idea of the transmission is that it is a mind-to-mind transmission going all the way back to Shakyamuni Buddha. Okay, and I'm the 91st generation in that line. Well, in fact, just to start with, part of that, you know, if you were at Treetop, where they're doing a service every so often, or you come to one of the retreats where there's a service, they often chant the lineage, right? And they chant all of those names, all the 90 plus generations. Well, the fact is that lineage is partially mythical. Okay, they actually didn't know all of the names of all of the people in that progression, and so they adopted some names. And of course, if you're going to adopt a name, you might as well adopt a really important teacher, not some poor schmuck back in the mountains. So the lineage is a little bit enhanced in places. Does that mean it's inauthentic? I don't think so. But I think it needs to be sort of taken for what it is. The other premise that goes with that is that each generation, when they transmit, the teacher is acknowledging that the student that they're transmitting to, that their realization is deeper than their own. Well, if you follow that logic, since I'm 91 generations after Shakyamuni Buddha, I'm way more enlightened than that guy, you know. And so, once again, not a very correct assumption. Right? So there's a bit of sort of mythology woven in there. And yet there's an essential truth that I believe that most of the time, you know, I think in the West, we take transition more seriously than some of our ancestors in Asia. In Japan, in particular, Dharma transmission became very corrupted. And it became a thing that was passed from father to son, almost always from father to son, not daughter. And it was this kind of thing where the young man went off to one of the principal, principal monasteries to Eheji or Sojiji, the Soto monasteries, and spent a couple of years there, like a boot camp, when they were young, 18, I don't know, maybe even younger. And then they go home and they run the family. They're sort of given transmission, then they go home by their father, and they go home and run the family temple. And this has provided a nice livelihood for a number of generations of Zen teachers in Japan, but has not sustained the idea that there's some correlation between realization and transmission. So it hasn't at all times and all places been equally authentic. Again, that I believe here in the West, not bad. I think the teachers here in the West take it very seriously. And transmission is not given lightly. So that's what our authority rests upon, this process of transmission, this idea of lineage, and this idea of passing on mind to mind realization. So certainly not a perfect process. And therefore, I think it's incumbent upon students to question, to ask. Does this teacher really have it? Do they have what I'm looking for? Can they give me the guidance to go where I want to go in my spiritual practice? That should not be automatic. It should never be automatic. In the worst cases, that automatic investment with power resulted in abuse. Steph used to say, because he was conscious of those things, he used to say, never give away your power. Never give away your power. If something doesn't smell right to you, if it doesn't feel right to you, trust those instincts. Trust those instincts. And where that hasn't happened, initially in this country, we treated teachers, not just in Zen, but in all forms of Buddhism, as sort of as gurus with this unquestioning authority. And that resulted in some bad instances. And I've talked about those before, so I'm not going to talk about them again now. But that's so the question of authority, what's the authority? The teacher needs to create and maintain authority by their words and their deeds. And you should be able to see that. And if you can't see that, go someplace else. That's just really the only standard we have to go by. And frankly, it's the only one I'm comfortable with. In my work life, there's lots of certifications that you have to get and licenses that you have to get and all of those sorts of things. And as far as I'm concerned, those just sustain mediocrity. And don't really create a fertile, vital atmosphere that would be right for spiritual practice. So you should be able to see that. You should be able to feel that. You should find that. And you should trust yourself, right? Trust your own instincts. Now, sometimes the teacher is right. And especially when we're talking about koan study. Okay. So that's the other side of this coin. Whether the teacher tells you you've passed a koan or you haven't passed a koan, you need to have faith in that process, in that guidance. Excuse me. But even there, my understanding, my observation of the process of koan study has been changing over the years. And I think initially I had much more of a belief that there was a right response to a koan. And there are many people in Zen today who feel that way, you know, and if you don't give the right response to the koan, you don't go on to the next koan. Okay. What's the right response? Well, there are some koans which is just completely unambiguous. The right response is so clear that anything else just isn't going to pass the koan. But that isn't the case most of the time. These characters in the koans lived over 1,000 years ago. And all of the koans were well, not all, most of the koans were dialogues between teachers and students in Tang Dynasty China. They were in archaic Chinese dialects, which somebody has, to the best of their ability, 1,000 years later, attempted to translate into English as faithfully as they can, reproducing the attention of the teacher in that original dialogue. Now, I hope that sounds impossible, because I believe that it is. You know, if you weren't in the room, and often these are taken out, the other thing is the koan is taken out of context, right? So we don't know, they may have been talking for an hour, and 55 minutes into the hour, this little snippet occurs, and that's what got preserved, and that's what we're working with as the koan. And we don't have the context, we don't have the benefit of the other 55 minutes of conversation. So there also is a certain amount of conjecture there on the part of the translator and on the part of us. It's like, you know, really, what was this person trying to say? And that's actually part of the value of the koan. I tend to relish the more obscure koans. The koans that absolutely defy our rational explanation. The koans that make us pull our hair out, across our eyeballs. You know, why do I think that? Because more and more, I talk about sort of initially feeling like there were right answers, and I feel less and less and less like there are right answers, with notable exceptions. And I come to believe it's the process. I've come to believe it is the process. The process of letting go of our firm attachments to our thoughts, to our concepts, and being willing to freely shift and move and see the koan from many different perspectives. Not locked in on one view of the koan, not locked in on one view of reality, but being open and being willing to shift and being willing to relinquish ideas that we have held closely, perhaps for decades, perhaps for our whole lifetime, and be willing to see in a completely new, fresh way. That's what the koan causes us to do. And out of that process, something emerges. But I'm finding out more, I'm feeling more and more that it is that process and not the outcome of the process that's the most important thing. So as I've said before, I look for three things when I pass somebody on a koan. Okay. And the first of those things is it the Dharma? Is what you're saying consistent with the teachings of the Buddha? Consistent with our understanding of the universe as Buddhists, and so on. The second thing is it the Dharma as expressed in that koan? You know, every koan is about the relative and the absolute. There's only a very few that you can pass with that with that answer. Most of them are pointing to something much more specific. And so it's like, okay, is your response directed towards what that koan is looking for? And the third one is, did it move you in some way? Did it challenge you to see something different in some way? You know, and I probably shouldn't give this away, but you know, when people come and say, you know, when I first looked at this koan, I thought da, and then I suddenly realized, no, that wasn't it at all. You know, that's what I want to hear. Okay, that koan has ripped away something and revealed something new underneath. You know, that's why koan study is so powerful. It's so powerful. I mean, I love shikantaza. And shikantaza is powerful in its own way. But it's also possible to be fairly complacent in shikantaza. The koans don't tolerate complacency. They force us to get in and do a little mud wrestling. So that is the one really major exception that I say comes to the fallibility of or infallibility of the teacher, is that the question of the koan. If the teacher is saying you didn't pass and you think you passed, you're probably wrong. But that doesn't mean that you can't dispute it. You know, tell me I'm wrong. You'll lose in the end, but there's no reason that you can't try. No, seriously, I've had students convince me. You know, not often, but it can happen. And that's wonderful. Because that's finding your voice, your Dharma. You know, there's this, one of the sort of the paradoxes of the Dharma is that we all see it a little differently and we all express it a little bit differently, and it's still the Dharma. You know, if you go to a retreat, a treetop retreat, and one night Peter Harris is talking, and then the next night Todd is talking, and the next night Jim is talking, and so on. And then I talk or say, each one of us are going to say something pretty radically different. And yet we're all expressing the same Dharma. you know, it's like a copse of trees growing out of the same root. And all of the trees may look a little differently, but they all join together at the root. The Dharma is the root. And no matter who's expressing it, that truth should shine through. And it also is necessarily an expression of each of our individual natures. When Peter Harris speaks, it is poetry. It is infused with poetry, and it is poetry. It's beautiful. I could never do that. You know, my talks are different. Peter can't babble incoherently as well as I can. So, you know, but the same Dharma. So teachers are going to be different. We're going to express ourselves differently, but the core of the teachings should always be the same. So sort of also kind of heading around here to a little bit more about the sort of the transformation of Zen teaching, of Buddhist teaching, and the Dharma in the West. You know, I just read tonight about a teacher. I don't remember his first name, but his last name is McLeod, just like Jamie. And he's out in LA teaching, and he has totally, all he does, he's in a Tibetan tradition, so he doesn't use the word Daishan, but all he does is the face-to-face teaching, the Daishan. He doesn't have a center. They don't have rituals or ceremonies of any kind. And in fact, he calls himself a meditation consultant, which I think is a horrible term. It's like the commodification, but he's not, he's very, I think from what I read, he's a very real guy doing very real work with students, but he's doing it all one-on-one, all in one-on-one face-to-face teaching. And he's guiding them in their practice. Because as I gather it, he became disenchanted with simply perpetuating the trappings of a practice that had come from another culture. And he did not see the utility in simply maintaining those cultural artifacts. And as you know, I'm inclined to lean more and more that way. You know, it is perfectly possible to be fully and deeply realized and never have done a bow in your life. Right? Bowing doesn't enlighten us. It has some good functions. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, by the way. It can help us with humility. It can help us with respect. It can help us be mindful, like bowing when we're going into and leaving the zendo, reminding us, place of practice, pay attention, so on and so forth. It can have a lot of value, but it is perfectly possible to be completely and deeply realized and never have bowed. Bowing is not essential. And I could take every aspect of our practice with a couple of exceptions. What are the exceptions? Well, the primary exception is Zazen. The meditation is the heart of the practice. The meditation is the heart of realization. And I would probably add Daishan to that. I think it's invaluable to have the dialogue with the teacher, to have the guidance of a teacher. Very important. I think retreats are probably essential. I think they are. Because in retreats, we can go deeper in our practice than we can in our normal, ordinary lives. You know, having that time, a dedicated time with fewer distractions to focus on practice, I think that can be extremely valuable, especially at certain junctures in a person's practice life. But all the rest is probably superfluous. It may be beautiful. We may love it. You know, it may make, you know, it may inspire us in ways, but it isn't essential to the process of realization. So I think a lot of walls are coming down, right? You know, walls are coming down. Teachers are not perfect. You know, boy, when I started, holy cow, Mary Jo, you go back to this too. Imagine telling imagine telling Dido you thought he was wrong. that that would never not be something you ever did twice. That's for sure. You know, but that was another time, another place, and another. Dido was the second generation of teachers in this country. Right, he received direct transmission from Maizumi Roshi. And as we have more and more and more generations in this country, as we move further away from the original teachers who came here from Asia to establish these lineages, the more we're going to see change. No, and not everybody agrees with that change. I should speak for that side. There with people who would say that we're simply diluting and bastardizing and trivializing the practice. And it's a legitimate point of view. It's not the point of view that I share. But there are certainly some very fine teachers who hold that point of view. So I think, again, it goes to the student to decide where they want to be, you know, in terms of who they want to practice with, what style of practice is comfortable for them, what resonates with them. You know, I really see it as we are evolving, and we are evolving together. And that's ideal, right? What does the Dharma teach us? Impermanence. Impermanence. And if we understand impermanence, it may very well be that there is something very wrong with doing things the way they were done hundreds of years ago. If we haven't changed and evolved, what's wrong with that? You know, I see that in a completely different context where maybe it's a little easier to see. And of course, this is also not everybody would agree with me on this, but I watch the AA program. And one of the things they've attempted to do in AA is not to change from, I think it was 1936 that the program was founded till today. They try to do everything as much as they were done originally as they possibly can. And they read the same readings. If you've ever gone to an AA meeting, it's very archaic. It's in the language of 1936, you know. And the whole program was designed by upper middle class white men. Well, who's coming into AA today? Women, people of color, people who are poor, you know. And there's whole aspects of the program that don't speak to them because, powerlessness, those narcissistic white men needed to become powerless. They needed to be less arrogant and less self-assured. They needed, talk about get on their knees. They needed to get on their knees and pray because of what their status was in society and the things that got them where they were. But now, someone coming in who's had a life of oppression, who's had a life of powerlessness, and they come in and they say, okay, the first step is you've got to admit that you're powerless. It's one of the big feminist criticisms of AA. So I don't want to stay on AA too much, but my point being that when something is inflexible, when it doesn't change over time, that may not be a strength. It may not be a strength. And that is important that we examine and ask the questions. What's the authority of the teacher? Excuse me. What is it that we do when we practice? Why do we practice the way that we do? What's the point of the whole thing? I mean, as some of you know, I'm even, excuse me, this is the problem of going out to have dinner before teaching. I'm burping up the meatloaf. Anyway, so, I'm starting to, certainly looking at more and more looking at the dramatic, earth-shaking Kensho as unnecessary. And that the path of slow, gradual enlightenment is just as significant, just as important. And who we become along the way. The old Rinzai, approach was kind of to suspend everything, get enlightened. Everything is secondary to that. And no, be a good person. Have compassion. That's the essential. Realization will come. Might be sudden and great. It might be very, very gradual. Doesn't matter. It's secondary to our manifesting compassion and loving kindness all along the way. Thank you.
I'm through Jamie. I'm talking with Jundo of Tree Leaf. You know who he is, Peter?
Jundo Cohen.
Yep. Because I'm not going to go for Tokido, but I have a set of robes and the fabric to make the kesa, and I'm completely happy to donate it to somebody who feels called to that path and cannot afford it. And it looks like it's going to work. So I'll be able to mail everything off to him.
I don't. What are you going to be mailing off to him? The materials?
All the robes, and and the fabric to make the kesa.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
He has many students, I guess, and he has many around
Right.
the world.
And he has people who can't afford to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars.
Which is, that's wonderful. That's wonderful that you're doing that, Mary Jo. Yeah. And for those who don't know, Jundo Cohen is an American teacher in Japan. He's in he lives and teaches from Japan via the internet, and has developed a sort of worldwide following of people who know of him and practice with him.
So this is enough. This and working on my mind, that's enough.
Well, that's what the Buddha said too. Dogen said, right? Again, and I could take the other side. Certainly, there are people who find the ceremonies and the rituals very meaningful, very important. And I don't want to necessarily imply that there is right or wrong in either side of some of these. They're not even really debates, but on either side of these dichotomies, I guess, and I think it's that people need to find the practice and the way to practice that is their heart.
So there's a 3-part Jukai coming next month?
Actually a 4-part Jukai.
That's right, somebody from out of state. Yeah.
Yes, Andrew.
Right.
I don't know. They're all pretty questionable, Mary Jo, at this point. I don't know that.
Peter, to your list of Zazen, Daisen, and retreat, I think I would add to that Dharma talks. I just really find, and I know it's a lot of work for you, but I do find that each week talking about something that is either topical or more general, it just always seems like I walk away with some thoughts to mull over during the week, and frequently to apply to my koan, what was said and how do I work with that. So I think those are certainly very helpful to my practice. And as far as ritual, I don't think I'm so wedded to the Zen ritual, but I do try to develop my own rituals at home to, I don't know, bring a sense of reverence to, or attention to where I am and what I'm doing. So, and those are just individual and, work for me and might not work for anyone else, but I like that part of practice too, my own rituals.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, well, and I think there's people who would say the same thing about the traditional rituals, the formal rituals, but rituals certainly can impart certain meanings, certain states of consciousness, certain awareness, just at the most basic level. One of the things when we're teaching people about Zazen and establishing a meditation practice is suggesting that they do it in the same place in their house each day, right? To begin to develop a sense of place around that spot. And then if it's possible to make a little altar for themselves and, put on that altar whatever they want. Do they want a candle and incense? Do they want a Buddha or a Kuan Yin or, a cross and Jesus, whatever's going to resonate with them. And I certainly think that is valuable. I don't mean to exclude those things, but I'm also saying they're not necessary. in another sense, you know. They are enhancements, and then, you know, they can help us sort of deepen our process, our practice. But well, just that.
I was very reverential when I was weeding today and then found a little pile of little doggy poop in the garden and reverentially threw it in the middle of the street.
Well, I hope no neighbors were passing at that time.
No. It was, you know, it was a ritual.
Yeah, well, you can weed the garden with reverence, right? I mean, you can do any, you know, anything. And that's a good quality to bring into our lives. Again, I'm not trying to suggest that it in any way isn't, you know. And then maybe it's part of our practice, sort of taking care of our life, taking care of our world. You know, I'm just saying it doesn't necessarily have to be in the Zen form or a particular Zen form. You know. No, I don't know. You know, McLeod's teaching excludes Sangha. And I think most people would say Sangha is very important. You know, I talked not very long ago, within the last couple of weeks, about the fact that I believe there's sort of a Zazen field that exists. And when people are sitting together, their practice is deeper, you know, than if they're sitting alone, even if it's via the internet. But just the fact of being with others in a retreat or in a you know, it amplifies it in some ways that I can't begin to understand. So, you know, he doesn't mention that, and or at least I don't think he does, and so that's another another aspect. I think that the community that's developed is very valuable, and it would be very different practicing completely alone.
The last 2 Saturdays at Treetop have been amazing with real depth and intangible yet tangible. And everybody went, "Oh yeah, I'd forgotten."
Oh, because those are the first 2 weeks that you've been back in the Zendo.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
It is huge, and Sangha friendships are huge.
Yeah, it's another strange aspect. You know, you can sit with somebody in a Sangha and particularly in retreats for a very long time and never have said more than 2 sentences to each other, and yet somehow a deep appreciation develops, you know, and you have a relationship with that person, but it's not based on talking, it's not based on the things that we normally associate with friendships. It's just from sitting. Another interesting aspect. Good. So I've almost refuted everything that I've said tonight. So that's my final lesson for tonight. Hold it all lightly. Hold it all lightly. Whatever we think we know, hold it lightly. Good. Any final thoughts? You know, I will say one comment. You made a comment about Dharma talks, Susan. You know, I mean, I'm sure it's obvious. You know, all my talks now are extemporaneous, and I simply could not. You know, I know how much work. You know, when Peter or Jim or Todd, whoever writing a talk, that's hours and hours of work, and you know, often done over a period of weeks or even months. And I just, I just don't have the time, to do a talk every week. There's no way I could do that. Dido used to, by the way, he used to give a Dharma talk, I think almost every week, maybe not every week, but, and his talks were meticulous works of craftsmanship. They were amazing. Well, so there's no way that I could do that, A, and there's no way that I could do that weekly, B, so I find that I have to talk extemporaneously, and that has some advantages and some disadvantages. But the advantages that I think it has is it keeps it fresh. Things are evolving in the world now so fast. Our lives are changing now so fast. That's something that I thought about 3 weeks ago has already lost its relevance in a way, and so I do think it has the advantage of staying close to the changes in the world, that are just, such a ridiculous pace. Okay. Onward. Did everybody have a big thunderstorm tonight already?
Yeah.
Yeah. It rained here as hard as I've ever seen it rain in my life. It really came down for a while.
Wow.
Yeah, good. The plants love it. So, okay.
Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it.